Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jam Along. This is an interview with Ethan Setiawan, wonderful mandolin player. I recorded this a couple of weeks ago before I went on holiday, and I was supposed to finish it and get it out last week, and I didn't because I was ill on holiday. But it is done and it's coming out right now. I really enjoyed this. It's all about his fascinating new duet record, Encyclopedia Mandolinnica, which sees Ethan duet with people like Mike Marshall, Matt Flinner, Jacof Jolliff, whole kind of cast of great mandolin players. And it's a really cool album, really diverse, really sort of, you know, I love a duets album, as anybody who's been listening to the podcast for a while knows, and this is no exception. Really enjoyed chatting about how the project came together, the people he plays with, kind of the benefits of taking a year to do it rather than just going in and spending a few days recording. And yeah, just really cool. I will stick some links in the show notes to where you can go and get this record, because you should. But that's it. Enjoy the chat with Ethan Setiawan. Ethan, welcome to Bluegrass Jam Along. It's great to have you here.
Thanks very much. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
I'm really interested to talk about this record, Encyclopedia Mandolinnica, which, like, it sort of stands in a really cool tradition of string band records, in that it's a bunch of duets mostly, with some sort of trios in there. But when I think about albums that I love, like Darrell Angus' Diary of a Fiddler, or Mike Marshall and Chris Thielen's Into the Cauldron, or like Bryan Sutton's Not Too Far from the Tree, I love records like that because there's something beautiful about hearing two people have a conversation.
Totally, yeah.
Just everything's there. You can hear what everybody's doing all the time, and it's a beautiful thing. And it sounds like this record is something that you took a bit of time to make, and that's kind of part of the process. It wasn't a case of going into the studio for 3 weeks and recording a bunch of tracks. It's been a bit of a kind of process.
Totally, yeah. The record took, I would say, just over a year. It was just over a year from kind of start to finish for the recording sessions. And I hadn't made a record like that before. You know, most of my recording experiences have been like, 3 to 7 days in the studio of like a pretty intense recording session where everyone's really focused and you're really working on sort of the material together and all that kind of stuff. But it was really nice actually to take some time with this material, and it actually like helped me. I didn't have too much of a plan going into it, I guess, beyond the fact that there were some people that I wanted to play music with. But I could let the material kind of develop over time in a way that you are allowed to so much if you're making the record all at once, all in one fell swoop. That was really cool to kind of look at how the record was evolving and then make decisions kind of based on that. Kind of a cool bird's eye view type thing.
And were there people in place at that point, or were you still sort of approaching people through the year?
It was, a little bit of both, I guess. I kind of started out with a big list, gigantic list of people, and you unfortunately can't have everybody, but started with a big list and worked with a bunch of those folks, and then as things developed over the course of that year, was kind of narrowed in on who exactly it would be, and even through even throughout the year, you could make decisions and changes based on how your musical life was going, I guess, which was really interesting, to chase after things that felt good in the moment.
Well, that's interesting. So as you started with whichever the first session was, we could talk about that in a sec, but did you find the record you were making sort of changed over that year as well, in terms of what happened would influence what happened next. And
Yeah, exactly. Especially in sort of the material side of things. That was kind of the biggest way it could change. I could say, well, maybe we need something. There's been a lot of mid-tempo things so far. Maybe there's something fast that we could do for this next session, or we actually need something like that's quite slow. Let's do something slow. Stuff like that. Yeah.
And it's really interesting with any two instruments that are the same instrument, that the register will be the same. But it's particularly true, I think, of mandolins, where, like with a guitar, you have a little bit more range to play with potentially. But with a mandolin, it's like being in the same sonic space or not is a big part of the conversation, isn't it? And how you keep out of each other's way, or you don't, or how you overlap. And so I guess one of the other fantastic things about this is then you're able to introduce an octave mandolin or a mandocello, or kind of mix up that a little bit as well.
Totally. Yeah. The mandolin duet is a very specific sound. I love playing in duets, and playing in mandolin duets especially are a nice little corner of the musical world. But yeah, records like you mentioned, Mike Marshall and Chris Thiele, I think that's a really nice sort of utilization of the texture. I think those people thought a lot about like how to use that texture really well. There's a lot of great things to take away from that record. So yeah, it's kind of not as simple as recording a tune and chopping when you're not playing lead and stuff like that. Like a bluegrass mandolin player might just approach playing with a band. It very much becomes about the individual musician and how they react in real time to what else is going on.
And it must be fascinating to kind of watch a dozen different people approach that in different ways.
Totally.
Get to hear that, like, and sort of react to it in the space at the time.
Totally, yeah. Like the first session I did was with Matt Flinner, who's wonderful, of course, a great player and a great musician. And it was great. The way that I ran these sessions for the most part was that I would send maybe 2 or 3 tunes to whoever I was working with. And we would choose one, we would kind of narrow it down, but I wasn't even necessarily going in and saying, okay, these are the tune, this is the tune, this is what we're going to do. There might've been a couple of circumstances where I had a pretty firm idea, but for the most part, it was going in and saying, like, how do these, what strikes your fancy out of these 3 tunes? Which, yeah, allowed to be like really nice and collaborative. But yeah, it was great to see kind of Matt, sort of the process, I guess, behind all that, like great arranging on some of his solo records, and just how to take these melodies and play through them. Or like Mike Marshall, I sent him the melody of the tune that we ended up recording, and he instantly kind of wrote this little counterpoint that he plays on the intro of the tune. Things like that, things where like Mike loves to get involved with whatever he's working on musically. And so him going in on that, things like that. Yeah, very, very fun. Or yeah, Daryl, I sent, we did an octave mandolin trio with Daryl and Sharon, and Daryl, of course, instantly comes back with a different chord, on one of the parts of the tunes. Which again, yeah, Daryl's always trying to hunt down sort of the core of the music, which is very, very, very cool to see in real time.
And it's an interesting element of 2 musicians playing together. Is one person is playing a melody, like in a band, you can't spontaneously choose to reharmonize something, but as a accompanist, you can suggest a different direction, or you can nudge somebody towards something, or just drop something in that feels different to mix things up.
Totally. Yeah, it feels very conversational to me playing in a duo. Not that playing in a band is not a conversation, but with 2 people, it's so exposed and so bare that you really do hear these 2 people conversing, through this language of music.
Yeah, and it definitely feels like that. And did you end up recording, although you sent maybe more than one tune to each person, did you record one with each sort of personal group in the end, or did you do more than one?
Pretty much just recorded one tune. There are some sort of outtakes lying around of some like bluegrass tunes, and with Mike and Kat we recorded some Bach, and there's a couple of jazz standards. lying around from sort of the musicians who are more into playing standards and stuff like that. But I guess kind of for the bulk of the record, it ended up being mostly original. With Don Sternberg, I recorded a standard, a jazz standard, but for the rest of the record is all tunes that I wrote. And so kind of once it started to head that way, I kind of thought, well, maybe this is kind of a nice sort of direction to go with the record as well, to go to original music as well as mandolin duets.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, in some respects, it can be easy to do a record of fiddle tunes because you can just turn up on the day and say, what do we feel like, and play through a few and pick something. But if you know you're going to play something original, then there needs to be a bit more kind of thought behind that. And it's really interesting you were saying that Mike sort of wrote a counterpoint, Daryl kind of, changed the chord here and there. Was there any of the material that kind of went in different directions once you started playing with people that you hadn't expected?
That's a good question. I don't think anything wildly surprised me. The thing that surprised me most every time was sort of how people approached the material. When I recorded with Andrew Marlin, he came up with this really nice sort of background texture to the melody that I played at the very beginning of the tune. So things like that would surprise me, just like the way that people would kind of go about playing the tune. Or, I've spent a lot of time playing music with Jacof Jolliff, and it was funny to hear him play my tune back to me. It was funny to hear someone else's lens applied to your own music, especially someone's lens who you know really well.
Yes, it's really interesting. I talked to Jake a while ago, and he talked about not writing tunes on the mandolin if possible, trying to kind of write his tunes away from the instrument. And I think that it's also interesting how people approach writing a melody in the first place. Are you a kind of a sit down and write every day kind of person? We'll be right back with you just after this. Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins. Don't miss your chance to meet up with the Collings Guitars team at the 2025 Fretboard Summit, taking place August 21st through 23rd and hosted at Chicago's Old Town School of Music. Get hands-on with the latest Collings acoustic and electric models, along with several unique high-end builds designed specifically for this guitar-focused show. Visit fretboardsummit.org for the incredible artist lineup, tickets, and more information.
I try to be. I've been trying to write a lot this year. It kind of goes in waves. There were a couple of years there, maybe sort of during the pandemic and after the pandemic, that I was writing a lot. And last year, not so much actually. I had already written a bunch of stuff for this record, or I was pulling tunes that were older. I was pulling tunes or pulling up ideas that had come from years previous. But yeah. Trying to sit down without the instrument and write based on your ear and what you hear and can translate from your ear is definitely a super helpful thing to sort of train your ear to produce those things, without having to have your fingers on an instrument to do something. A couple of the tunes on this record, I wrote like that, or at least there's always a revision process. There's a long revision process, but the tune that I recorded with Joe Walsh, that was a tune that I started on the mandolin, and then that tune kind of turned into a tune with maybe like 5 or 6 different parts, like sort of small little parts. And I don't remember exactly how many it started with. It might have kind of grown, but as I started to write it down, I wrote it down without the instrument in hand, and so I could kind of change things based on what my ear was hearing, as opposed to what I would just go to play on the mandolin. It's all about kind of getting away from the muscle memory on the instrument. It's great. It's good stuff.
And it's a lovely moment on the record. That's Mount Holly, isn't it? It's the 4th track on the record.
Yeah.
And at that point, we've had 3 kind of 2 mandolin tracks. And then suddenly just the texture opens out a bit. And you get that bit more sustain, and you get that bit more depth. And it's I guess it's things like you were talking earlier about having time to think what we need next. But for me, that was a beautiful moment, because not only do I really like that track, but it's suddenly the landscape changes a bit as well.
Totally. Yeah. A very different texture. That tune felt very natural to ask Joe to play on. Very spacious, very sort of flowing. And yeah, I'm playing mandola on it. Joe's playing the octave mandolin. And so very different sounding duet to two mandolins, you know? Yeah, like you're saying, it really just kind of blooms a little bit.
Yeah, and there's some lovely examples of that. Just, there's a bit of five-string electric mandocello. There's bits where you've got a trio with a sort of lower voiced instrument and things. And it just, I think, it refreshes your ear as you listen. And with records like this, and for me, this is my experience with them, but particularly instrumental records, it can take me a while to navigate them sometimes, because you listen. Yeah. I've talked about this in the podcast before, but anything that has lyrics immediately tells you which section of the song you're in, which section of the piece you're in, or if it's a new section, or But with purely instrumental music, it takes my ear a bit longer to adjust sometimes, and so having a kind of topography of registers and sounds and things just to look at tunes from different angles from, I think it certainly helps the early bit of listening anyway. And then once you're once you're knees deep in a record, you're used to all that, and then you're finding all the rest of the stuff as well. But it can really help the initial listening experience, I think.
Definitely, yeah. The instrumental stuff is funny just because, it's so open to interpretation, I guess. It's so, it could mean a lot of different things to different people, and that's also kind of the beautiful thing about it. I think that people can kind of ascribe their own meaning, their own values to whatever is kind of happening. Yeah,
there's a really interesting kind of thread of instrumental string band music, and kind of whether it's a full band or duets or trios, or things like skip hop and wobble, and I love the stuff that sits in that space. It's just this, and I think that's true. I think you're talking about interpretation and meaning and stuff. It sort of leaves a bit of room for you as a listener in the record, which is really nice.
Totally. Yeah, it's not it's not bluegrass, it's not jazz, it's not old time music, which really kind of, it's interesting that what people think music that I play sounds like, and you get all kinds of different sort of, it sounds like bluegrass, or it sounds like Celtic music, or it sounds like jazz, it sounds like rock music, it sounds like pop music. People hear all these different things in the music, which I think is really cool. That people, it's about what the listener brings to the moment and what the musician brings to the moment, and where that meets is kind of the really magic point.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually, is we all find different things in music because we have different points of reference. It's a bit like looking at somebody's kid and knowing their family. You see faces of other people in that family and that kid. If you don't know the family, you don't. But you're looking for, do they look a little bit like Uncle John or whatever? And music's very much the same. You can find things in there that, maybe you're the only person who finds that in there.
Mm-hmm. And you can draw an even more direct parallel between that and music, and saying, oh, Ethan kind of sounds like, he sounds kind of like Chris Thile. He also sounds kind of like, Sam Bush in broad strokes. I mean, you can get more and more specific if you want, or you can say, oh, it sounds like a mandolin, or it sounds like bluegrass, and it, again, just depends on the listener's context as to what they hear in the playing and in the music.
And the sort of Celtic strain is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I know you have a particular interest in Scottish music. Mm-hmm. Did that come from a particular kind of bit of music, a particular sort of experience of playing? Is it where did that come from?
Yeah, I guess I started playing some with Louise Bicken, who plays the fiddle and is from Orkney in Scotland. And so we've been playing music together for quite a while now in various projects. And we started playing together when I was still at Berkeley. We were both at Berkeley. And Maeve Gilchrist was working at Berkeley. She would come in. At that point, she was coming in periodically and doing lessons in the Roots program at Berkeley. And that was also super great to work with Maeve on that stuff, who's a beautiful player and really understands music in a really interesting way. And of course knows all these tunes. So yeah, kind of sort of a confluence of a couple things in 2018. And I remember coming to Scotland and sitting in the Ben Nevis pub for the first time And this will probably get me absolutely, strung up by the old time players. But, I thought to myself, well, these are just old time tunes, but more beautiful. That's what I'm hearing here.
There's definitely a sort of lyricism to sort of Scottish music. And it's interesting, like talking what we were talking about before about points of reference and stuff. To a lot of people, it probably just sounds like Irish music, or it
Totally.
sounds like, certain strains from North American fiddle music. And it's when you dig into the details, and particularly, I guess, as a mandolin player who is playing an instrument with the same tuning and scale as a fiddle, but the tone is produced in an entirely different way. Approaching things like ornamentation and stuff like that must be a sort of new mindset.
Yeah, it's a whole struggle that's ongoing for me personally. There's a lot of mandolin players over here in Scotland that have mastered that, and I aspire to that kind of thing. I mean, like, basically the question boils down to whether you do things with your right hand or your left hand, and I'm generally more adept at doing things with my left hand, creating ornaments in that way. So yeah, still working on the right hand stuff, but it's a fun challenge to get into.
Yeah, I think with stuff like that, I'd only really, when I started properly digging into bluegrass and string band music, realised just how much is going on when people play the fiddle, with the bowing in both hands and different types of slurs and ornaments and things that just a whole kind of lifetime of study in just one little branch of music, in one regional variation of that branch of music. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, that was kind of the thing that I realized pretty early on about most traditional music of this kind of sphere, bluegrass, old time Celtic music. It's all about the fiddle. It's all, whatever happens in the band is just generally driven by what the fiddle player is doing at any one point. And so that was kind of, I've learned my fair share of, mandolin solos and mandolin tunes, but always, trying to keep a firm grasp on what the fiddle player has played, looking at kind of their playing. If you're in Scotland or Ireland learning Scottish or Irish tunes, you're probably listening to the fiddle player a lot. And if you're playing old time, you're also probably listening to the fiddler a lot to learn melodies. And so, yeah, I kind of try to take the same approach to bluegrass and figure out what the fiddle players are playing in that style and kind of go from there.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I know that's another thing that hadn't really occurred to me, but it's just like in bluegrass, if you're a guitar player, you may well have learned your fiddle tune from another guitar player. You might, the way you play it might be down to Doc Watson or Tony Rice or Norman Blake or something. And it's that reminder that you can go back to the kind of source and create your own version. That's the whole joy of it. But I think sometimes you can hear when people haven't done that, or when they have sometimes.
Totally. Yeah. For me, it's all about the fiddle.
And in terms of the recording process for this record, was it essentially, it feels like it was recorded in a lot of places.
Yeah, that's true. Basically, a lot of the time I would end up going to where somebody was and recording there. So I record quite a bit of stuff myself, so I would take my gear somewhere sometimes, or just go to a studio in the area and book a half day at a studio and go track it there. So yeah, I don't think the tracks with Kat and Mike were recorded in the same studio because I went and visited them in Germany back last winter or whatever, and tracked it there. But yeah, I think besides that, everything else was done in a different studio. Yeah.
Does that sort of create challenges in terms of? It's something I find this really interesting because you've got different personnel on each track, different spaces, different combinations of mics, and yet it sounds very much like a complete listen. It sounds like a whole statement, if that makes sense.
That's good. Yeah, I mixed it as well, and I definitely kept it. I was definitely thinking about trying to make sure everything sounded somewhat similar. I used the same microphone for myself on almost everything except for one track when I forgot my microphone. I was flying somewhere and just forgot the microphone that I used and everything else. But besides that, I'm mic'd up in the same manner, which I think helped. And then besides that, just hopefully, trying to make the mixing match to some degree. And it's kind of the thing that I think about recording sometimes is just sort of the idea that, like you're saying, the musician is different, the microphone is different, the room is different. So they're going to sound, every mandolin player is going to sound different. I guess that's obvious, but hopefully I sound as similar as possible to myself on every track is, I guess, what I was going for in the end. Because the microphone's the same, the mandolin and the musician are the same, and the room is different. That's the one thing that's different about most of these tracks. And then the other musician as well. But yeah, just trying to get as consistent a sound as possible for myself was sort of the goal.
One of the placement of you in the panning is interesting as well for that reason, in that you are always in the same place pretty much.
Yeah, that was kind of the idea as well, that I'm sitting over here and then whoever else is playing is sitting over there.
Because it can be fascinating sometimes. Like when you know people's styles really well, an album with mixed personnel in it can often be very easy to navigate because you go, well, obviously that's who's in that speaker and that's who's in that speaker. But particularly in the days of like streaming and no liner notes, and so I love all the stuff that came through with this record about like which pick you'd used on which song and tunings and like and all the and the people who would listen to a record like this want to know that stuff, and so much of it gets missed when you just stream it.
Yeah, I love records like Tone Poems by David Grisman and Tony Rice, where like there's an entire book pretty much, an entire magazine at least, included with that album that is super fun for us nerdy mandolin players to read. I had a good time putting the liner notes together for this, and I just tried to think about what I would want to read if I saw somebody else's mandolins duets album. Try to think about what I would want to know about how it was done and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and ultimately it's the music that matters, but for people who are interested, that stuff is fascinating, like which instrument so-and-so is playing on this one, and which, and it is really interesting and I don't necessarily know that I experience music the same way as everybody else does, because I generally get sent more information with a new record than the average listener's going to get. And sometimes I'll get like this is always what I want, is I want some sort of like either a track by track breakdown or just something that talks me through what's going on, because I just love it. I like somebody to guide me through the listening experience a little bit, just until I find my feet and I can wander around where I want to. But I love something that just gives you a bit of an insight.
Totally. Yeah, it's kind of like two different ways to approach a record, right? Like either, like you're saying, with a little bit of guidance and some sort of insight into what is going on. But it, like you're saying with streaming, you're more often than not kind of just dropped into it, which is also a really cool way to listen to a record, I think. Like it's more of a treasure hunt, more of a active experience, I think, in some ways, that if you want to get to know it, it takes a lot of input from the listener, which I guess, is kind of the way that Spotify and streaming is set up, that it takes more intentionality from a listener to actually hear something. But yeah, it's a different way of looking at it for sure.
Yeah, and you're right, they're both totally valid. It's a bit like going to see a movie. Sometimes not knowing what it's about at all or who's in it or anything is the best way to experience something. And sometimes a bit of content totally really helps, It's,
right. Yeah, I've been trying to get people to listen to the record without looking at the liner notes and see if they can guess. If anybody can tell me who everybody is correctly without having ever looked at the liner notes once, they can have the record. And a mandolin lesson.
That'd be an interesting challenge, kind of a blind.
Yeah.
Particularly the ones where there's three of you.
Yeah, totally. Those are
you
tough.
could figure them out,
but
if you knew who one of them was.
Yeah, totally. Well, you could have the whole list. You could have the list of everybody who's on the record, and then if you can match everybody.
See, I feel like this needs to happen now. This is a YouTube video. You need, and it's.
I got to do this. But
totally. You're going to need like a pretty a mandolin player who's listened to a lot of mandolin players.
Right. Yeah. It's a very niche audience, like many of my projects are
but
for.
All of those people in that audience would want to watch that video.
Right. Yeah, yeah, totally.
That's really interesting. Um, I was going to ask you about how how often you've played. Are there some people on this record that, presumably with Mike Marshall, you've played a fair bit with him, and with Don as well. But I'm curious if there are people that you haven't actually made much music with before on this record.
Yeah, totally. One of the last sessions we did was with John Reichman, and I hadn't spent that much time with John. That was really great to work with John and work through this sort of like slow mellow tune. Um, so that was one that I hadn't played very much with. I guess I've worked a lot with Daryl Anger, usually as a fiddle player. Daryl being a fiddle player. But I hadn't worked that much with Sharon Gilchrist before then, so it was great to kind of work in the octave mandolin trio there. Who else is on this?
Well, I'll play the tracks, and you need to listen to it and tell me who you can hear.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Yeah. Tell who it was. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those are the two that stand out, I guess, that I hadn't actually done all that much with in the past.
And I love the note on the track with Jacob that said this record might contain the largest percentage of tunes in E flat of any mandolin record.
I don't know what happened. There's like 3 or 4 tunes in E flat, which is pretty significant for an album that is that's recorded on an instrument that doesn't do very well with flat keys, and is only 12 tracks, 11 tracks long. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I didn't write. One of them is the standard that I recorded with Don, I Hear a Rhapsody. And then I wrote this trio for Kat and Mike and myself to play, and this tune with Jake. So yeah, 3 tunes in E flat.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because often with jazz standards, they're sort of factoring in wind instruments, which tend to cope well with flat keys, and string instruments tend to cope better with sharp keys, up to a point. Depends how many sharps you want to go to, but yeah, it's really interesting. Are you going to get to play these tunes kind of live with people? And how's that going to work?
Yep. Yeah, basically, like I'll go and play a show with somebody, and we'll just play a show of duets, just me and another person. I'm touring some in the Midwest with Grant Flick, who mostly plays the fiddle, but is a great mandolin player and a great tenor guitar player. So we're going to play some duets. I'm going to play a show in Vermont with Matt Flinner, and I'm going to play a show in Maine with Joe Walsh. In October here, I guess. So yeah, we'll do some stuff.
It'd be interesting. Just for you to hear how they approach the tunes they weren't on the record, because there's a whole other world in a tune there, isn't there?
Totally. Yep. There's a whole record of stuff. Yeah, obviously, like Matt and Joe are on 1 tune each, and I'm not sure that we'll play the entire record down. Especially the trios get a little involved. But yeah, just try to play some of the music from the record, work up some tunes by the other person, do that kind of thing, and play some fiddle tunes and standards and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Actually, it should be fun.
And so looking back on it, obviously, a record takes an amount of time to record, and then there's an amount of time before it comes out as well. But looking back on the process and where you kind of started that year of, because you said it was almost exactly a year it took to make the record.
Yeah, started it was almost November. It was the very end of October, maybe a couple of days before November. I did the first session, and the last session was with Andrew Marlin, and that was maybe the first couple of days of November. So from 2023 to 2024, over the course of about a year.
And when you got to November 2024, did the record you have resemble the record you were expecting to have at that point? Was there something that went on along that process that sort of surprised you or intrigued you?
Yeah, I think it basically resembled what I thought it was going to resemble. Yeah, I think that, again, just having that time and being able to say, well, we're headed in this direction. We just need to go a little bit this way. We need this slow tune that I'm going to record with John or whatever. I like being able to make those little course corrections, along the way was really helpful. Um, and yeah, I mean, I guess like the X factor is always just like, what is the musician who I, don't necessarily play with all the time? What are they going to do when I show up to the studio and we play this tune? Um, so in that way, like I was always surprised whenever I showed up at the studio, um, usually in the best of ways. Um, so yeah, in that way, it was great. It was great to hear all these people play over my tunes and see what they would do um, when faced with this particular puzzle that I set before them. Um, it was very fun. I had a great time making this record. Um, very joyful, very fun. Yeah.
I mean, it's a fun record to listen to. There's an interesting, and maybe this is me, but there's a sort of a conception in my head, a sort of presupposition coming to a duet, a record of mandolin duets, that like it is going to sound like two mandolins for 45 minutes or whatever. And of course, it does exactly sound like that. Yeah. But it also is. I love being constantly surprised by what you can fit into something that feels like a relatively limited format. I love records to do that.
Totally. And I think that like that's all about the musicians that I asked to be on the record. It's in large part musicians who have decided to do things with the mandolin that you wouldn't necessarily think to do with the mandolin, or with music in general, even, which is the kind of music that I like to listen to, the kind of stuff that doesn't always go as expected. And yeah, I guess just kind of through those combinations, you end up with the Encyclopedia.
And it's really interesting you kind of chose to put this out with Alhiropa, which is very much a natural home for that kind of music. I talked to Joe on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and it's fascinating what he's doing there.
Totally, yeah. Joe does a great job, and has been super helpful with all of the sort of, the nitty gritty of the releasing digital music in this day and age. And yeah, obviously, like a lot of the stuff on there has been, doesn't fit in many boxes, which is, it can be hard to find a home for at your kind of standard label. And he's done quite a few other things for me, which is always great to work with Joe.
It's so true, saying something that doesn't necessarily fit in many boxes, and yet, like you were saying before, fits in lots of boxes as well. There's a bit of
sure,
it's the joy of something like that. It's kind of doesn't fit anywhere, and yet fits a little bit everywhere.
A little bit everywhere, totally. Yep. A lot of people will find, I think, many different facets that they'll enjoy and that they'll enjoy listening to and get something from,
I certainly have. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to, as with any good record like this, looking forward to learning more about it and getting in deeper. And like sometimes I wish I could speak to people about the record once it's been out 2 years. They've had some time to really kind of go through it, and because it's just there's lots more there that I haven't found yet, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's been great talking to you. I really enjoyed this.
Hey, you as well. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas.